All right, so today we're going to be supporting these really ornate dice that I designed in Fusion 360. These are for a Kickstarter campaign that we're going to be launching in the next couple of months. If you want to know more about this project, go ahead and hit the subscribe button because we'll be posting some more about it in the coming weeks. But we're going to be going through supporting these in Lychee Slicer, and this is for SLA printing, so we'll be printing these in resin. Okay, so first thing we want to do is get our files pulled into Lychee. Now, I should say I'm using the Pro version of Lychee here, so I've got a lot of extra features that if you're using the free version, you're not gonna have access to. But just just follow along, and if there's something you don't have, just work with what you got. We're gonna go ahead and pull all of our dice in just in one patch. Now, when you first drop them in, you'll see that it just kind of puts them all on top of each other. So you'll want to do an auto arrange on that. And we can just go to arrange. Arrange all. And you can see that there's a problem with one of them. That'll happen sometimes. Lychee's pretty good about repairing it. And now that guy's good to go. Now that we've got the parts in here, the first thing that I want to do is orient them. And when they first come in, you'll see that they just kind of have whatever orientation they had from the software they came from. And that's pretty much never going to be ideal. So I want to go to rotate auto orientation. And that's going to give it a little bit more of an optimal orientation to the print bed. For me personally, I like to orient these in a way so that the print always starts from a single point and then builds its way outward from there. Because, if you're trying to start it like on a flat plane, for example, because this isn't on the build plate, that plane that it's printing on, basically what's going to happen is that first layer is just going to fall apart if it's parallel to the build plate. So I like to try to start from the smallest point that you can and then build outward from there, which means that we want to give this a little bit more of an aggressive angle. So I'm going to rotate it just a little bit more until we get something that's more like that. There we go. Yeah, it looks pretty good. And then I'm just going to repeat that process with the other 7 dice until we've got them all oriented. Okay, once we got them all pretty well oriented in a way that I'm happy with, and we've got them all kind of laid out with a fair amount of space, I want to make some copies of these because normally I would go through and support the first set and then just copy that with the supports, but because I'm going to be supporting them all differently, I want to copy them now. So I'm going to grab all 7. I'm going to go to copy. I'm going to make 2 copies. And we want to check this keep arrangement box. Otherwise, it's just going to lay them all out in its own way. Now, because it keeps the exact same arrangement, it looks like it didn't do anything because it put them right on top of each other. So if we just select these one at a time, and then I can go to move, you can see that I can just move that set over and do that again. Copy. Cool. Now I've got my 3 sets. Now what I'm going to do on these is I'm going to do 3 different sets of supports. The first set, I'm going to do really heavy support on these. The second set, I'm going to do, about medium support. And on the last set, I'm going to do the minimum amount of support possible. I'm basically just only going to support the islands and the structure in a few places. I want to see how little I can actually get away with. Because if I have to go through production on these parts again, I want to know how much time can I actually save. Less support that I'm using is going to save me on resin. There's a lot of reasons to try to keep your supports to a minimum. Also, less support means less cleanup after the fact. But, again, because these are really, really intricate, really detailed parts, generally stuff like this is going to need a lot of support. But, I want to know how much I can actually get away with. So we're going to move on to the next step. So the next step is to go over into our prepare workspace. And you can see on the left side here, we've got support, we've got raft, and you've got some other stuff here that we're not going to mess with today. But the first thing I want to do is I want to make a raft for this part. So I'm going to select the part. You got a lot of different options here as far as a raft is concerned. If you're using the free version, you're not going to have most of these options. I think it only comes with the first 2. But any raft is going to help with 2 things. It's going to help keep the supports from flexing too much and moving around. And it's also really going to help you with removing the part from the print after it's done. My favorite is the line triangle because it's kind of a minimum amount of resin. It's basically just enough to connect all the supports to each other. So it kind of saves on resin, and it's also less surface area on the raft, which makes it a little bit easier to remove the part. So we're going to select that one. We're going to go back to support. And in the support window, you can see that you've got three options. You've got light support, medium support, and heavy support. Now, I want to start from the very first point on the print. If you go to your left side over here, this bar, you can see that you can just kind of move through the entire, it'll show you layer by layer the entire print job. I like to kind of start at the very beginning so I don't have to look around the entire print. It's easier for me to see what I'm doing. And I'm going to start at that very first point. Now, again, you can start with light support, you can start with medium support, or you can do heavy support. These are very small parts. They're probably close to an inch each. I don't think I would ever need any heavy supports on a part this small. Medium, I might want to do a few. It really depends. You know, it's a judgment call. I think based on experience, I could probably get away with using nothing but light supports on these. But what I'm probably going to do on the first set is I'm going to do a balance of light and just a few medium supports just to give it some extra rigidity. But I'm going to start with the light supports, and we're going to go from there. At the very beginning, also you'll notice sometimes if when you're trying to orbit around, it'll kind of pick a random spot to orbit around. If you double click your mouse scroller, it'll reset that view to whatever you're looking at. And now I'm orbiting around that one part, and that just makes your life a lot easier. So you want to have like a minimum of 3 supports to start with at your first point. And 2 things I want to avoid here. I want to try to keep them away from the corners if I can, because when I go to clean up these supports after the fact, if it's right on that corner, depending on what your penetration depth is, when you go to remove that support, sometimes it's going to break away a chunk of the print as it goes away, and that's going to be a lot harder to clean up. So I either want to try to stick to a flatter surface, or I want to try to put it in a place where it's not going to be as obvious when I go to clean it up. On this one, that's really challenging just because it's so small. So we'll probably go to the very, very tip. Because, I mean, you know, if you look at the tip of this part under a microscope, that flat section there is probably like 1/1000th of an inch. You can barely see it. Some of these details are smaller than the supports themselves. But I'll probably just go into that corner there. And unfortunately, I won't know how that's going to come out until after the print. And if I need to fix it, then I may have to go back and do this again. But I want to get those as close to each other as I can. And then I'll kind of just slowly start working my way up the part, supporting it wherever it needs it. I think on this one, you know, again, I want to stick to the either the flatter areas or the parts that are harder to see. At the very beginning of the print is where it's going to need the most support as it goes. Once it gets to be a certain size, it's less likely to kind of drift or deflect. But at the very beginning is where the highest support density is going to have to be. So I'll go from there, and then the next thing I'm going to do, I'm actually going to skip ahead, and I want to start with the islands on this print. So if you go over here under island, again, I'm not sure if you have this in the free version, but in the pro version, it's a really handy feature. I can just do an island search. And so what islands are, if you go through the print here, they're essentially parts of the print that when they first form, they're going to be isolated from the rest of the print, which means that when they first start forming, they're not connected to anything. So they'll just float away as the print is forming. And what Lychee will do is it'll flag these areas for me so they're easier to find. And yeah, you can see you got a couple there. The other thing that happens is it'll show you which layers you've got islands on the right side. So I'm going to start with there. Now I could just go through and manually put the supports where I want them on these islands if I was really particular, or I can just have it do it for me. I can just tell it to add support to the islands. That's a quicker way to do it. Saves you a lot of time. It really just depends on how precise you want to be. If there's some areas where I'm scared of losing a corner, I'll try to move that support around to the flatter spot. But on these, just because I've got so many to do, I don't want to be here for 3 hours doing this. So I'm just going to have it do it for me. And then I'm just going to add a few medium supports, and then I'm going to fill in the areas where I think it needs some more. So I'm going to add, and again, I want to try to stay to these flatter areas that are easier to clean up after the fact. So I'm going to add some medium supports there, there, maybe one here. I don't need a lot of them because, again, these are small parts, but I'm just trying to sort of increase the rigidity of the support system. That's probably good for the medium. Maybe I'll add another one on this side. And then the rest of them that I add are going to be light supports. And I'm going to go, like I said, on this first set, I'm just going to go ham on the supports. I'm going to add a ton of them just to really oversaturate it to see at what point it becomes a problem. But just starting at the bottom and working my way up is the easiest way to go. So I'll just kind of add them here and here. Feel free to skip ahead. You don't have to necessarily watch me do this whole thing, but the other thing I'm looking out for is areas where it's kind of cantilevered out from the main body. Because what can happen is if you have a really thin section that's stretched way out like that, that's going to be really prone to distortion and flexing. And there's a chance you're going to get some distortions in the print there. These parts are so small. Sometimes you're going to get what we call CAD goggles looking at it. It's like, you know, the same thing seems like it's really, really a huge, this thing seems like it's a really big cantilever that's sticking out, but in reality, it's probably only maybe 10, 20 thousandths of an inch. It's actually really, really small. So maybe that's not as much of a factor here. But on a bigger part, that would definitely be a concern. Looks like it missed a couple spots on. Yeah. Like I said, I'm really going overboard on these. You definitely wouldn't need anywhere near this many on a part like this, but. And then once you turn that corner, and you have these surfaces that are facing vertically, these don't really need any support at all. So 90% of your supports, if not all of your supports, are going to be on the faces that face downward. All right, we're getting pretty close to our saturation point here. That's already starting to look like a lot of support. I do want to try to be symmetric as much as possible. And again, I'm just avoiding the corners wherever I can, trying to stick to the flatter surfaces just because they're going to be easier for me to clean up. You know, it should be said that this stuff is as much art as it is science. A lot of people have different ways of doing it. There's more than one way to skin a cat. You know, as long as you can eat it when you're done is really the only thing that matters. Probably put one right there. All right. I'd say that's pretty close to overkill. Maybe one more there. But yeah. And then the other thing I want to mention is in the pro version of Lychee, you won't have this in the free version, but you have the option of changing what your penetration depth is. If you go over here to tip, I can select one of these supports and I can go to the tip section and you have an option for penetration. By default, it's going to be 0. Generally, your penetration is going to range anywhere from 0.1 to 0.3 millimeters. You know, that's on most of the jobs that you do. Larger, heavier supports are probably going to be on the heavier side. It's going to be closer to 0.3. On really high res prints like these, we're going to be doing these in 8K. I've been able to get away with little to no penetration whatsoever because it's such a high resolution that essentially what happens is that the support, it clings to the surface of the part. So you don't actually have to have it penetrate into the part, which is going to make our cleanup a lot easier. But it's, you know, it's risky doing that. I've gotten away with it, but you can only do that if your settings are really, really well dialed in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of err a little bit on the side of safety, and I'm going to give these all a minimum of 0.1 millimeter support. So I can just select them all. I can go here and I can say 0.1 millimeter, and then it'll set them all to that. And then it's going to remember that setting. That's going to be, you know, as I do the rest of these, it's going to keep that same 0.1 millimeter setting. And the last step here now is to just add bracings to these supports because, you know, you definitely want to do that. Well, I mean, again, you might get away with it with a smaller part, but it's good practice to always do that. If you go to structure and you say small object bracing, and then it's going to add these cross bracings to keep the supports from bending and flexing, and that's going to increase the precision and accuracy of the part as it prints. But that's it for the first one, and then we're just going to repeat that process for the rest of these guys. Okay, so you can see here, we've got all three sets fully supported, ready to print. And as you can see, we've got varying degrees of support on each set. So the first set is pretty heavy, probably a little overkill on the supports. The middle set is pretty reasonable. And then the set on the right is going to be absolute minimal support, like the least I could possibly justify getting away with. And we'll do all three prints together in the same session. So let's get these sent off to our printer and see what happens.
Seasons change, time passes by, as the weeks become the months, become the years.
All right, so we just gave these a quick alcohol bath, and at first glance, it looks like all three sets are actually looking pretty good. I know it's kind of hard to get my camera to focus here, but the set on the right side here is the one that had the least, like, minimal supports, and yeah, actually, at least the top side looks pretty good. We won't know until we actually demount these to see how they came out. All right, so there's a little known trick to getting these supports to come off a lot easier and with minimal damage to the part itself, and that's actually to wash them in boiling water. So I've got a bin of boiling water here, and I'm just going to dip the build plate with the prints on it in there and let it sit for a second. Get my camera to focus here. And then it'll soften after a minute or two. And now I don't want to lose track of which prints are where on the bed. And let's see, I'm already getting it mixed up. Yeah, okay. So this set on the right that I've just demolded is the one with the minimal amount of supports. So just so I can see what's going on, you see how easy that came off? Came off with almost no effort at all. Still clinging a little bit. Give that another second. Just dip it back in the water. And it just comes right off with no effort at all. All right, so this is our most complicated part with a minimal amount of print support. And you can see that it actually still came out pretty well. We didn't have to use a ton of support on that guy. The only thing we did on this one was we supported the islands, and I did a few medium-sized supports at the corners, but this was supported with almost nothing. And there's hardly any issues with this print at all. I'm gonna have a pretty easy job cleaning this up. Looks like something got stuck to our part right there. I'll have to clean that guy up. Well, we're gonna go through the rest of these. We'll clean these up, and then we'll kind of compare them all to see how they all came out. All right, so we've got our 3 sets laid out here. This is our heavy support set, this is our medium support set, and this is our very, very light support set. Just going through these one at a time, starting with the D6. So there's not a massive difference between the 3 as far as the finer details are concerned. I can tell that we're going to have a lot more work to remove some of those supports. But you can see what I was talking about here, how when the supports come away, they kind of leave these little pock marks behind. It kind of takes a piece of the print away from it. And again, that's that 0.1 support penetration depth. I might try to redo some of these just at 0, just to see if I can get away with it. But on the first set, I want to make sure that I at least get a full set that I can use to do diagnostics from. But between the 3, if I hold these 2 next to each other, there's not a huge difference in the details between them. So I guess the primary difference here is that the one on the left, I'm going to have more cleanup to do on these because there's more of the supports that left imperfections behind. With this one, let's say, okay, let's pick the 4 because these are oriented the same way. You can see how there's much more stuff to clean up on the one on the left than there is on the one on the right. And if we compare that to the minimal support version, here, actually, let's go ahead and let's do the 6 because there's more. Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's a pretty broad spectrum of what you can get away with. But between these 2, there's not a huge difference in work. So if I had the option, I'd probably do all 3. If it was the first time doing a print, I would do it all 3 ways, just so I could get the best idea of what's going to be the easiest for me to deal with in post-production. But honestly, I would probably be happy with the set with minimal support. These definitely, there's not any major imperfections that I can see. This isn't even close to a print failure. So yeah, I mean, like I said, maybe when it comes to really, really small prints like this, you can actually get away with pretty minimal supports, which is going to make your cleanup job a lot easier. If we look at the D20, this is minimal support. I might have one of the corners is a little dull, just because the sharp edges got lost. Can't find it now. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, if you look really closely, you can see how kind of those sharp corners are a little dull there. I probably could fix that. We're going to be making molds from these, so I only have to do any cleanup that I have to do. I only have to do once. But like I said, as you can see from this, there's a pretty broad spectrum of what you can get away with when it comes to really detailed prints like this. So if I had the option, I'd probably do it all 3 ways. And most of the time, I'm probably going to err on the side of safety in the beginning, just to make sure that I don't have a failed print, right? So I'd start with the heaviest support, even though I know it's more cleanup. I know that I can then just dial that back down to save myself time later, because you're going to waste less money by using extra support than you are by having to do the print all over again. But yeah, so the next step is going to be to clean these guys up, fill in those little pop marks, and put a coat of primer on these. We'll probably save that for another video, but I hope this gives you some idea of kind of the ins and outs of the nitty-gritty of the process. like I said, these are going to be a Kickstarter project. So if you're interested in these, go ahead and subscribe to our channel because we're going to be posting some more videos about this project in the coming weeks. So keep an ear out. Thanks for watching.